You are listening to Down Home. Toronto is celebrated as one of the most culturally rich and diverse cities in the world, a reputation that owes much to one of its original neighborhoods, the Ward. Nestled in the heart of the city, this historic neighborhood became a sanctuary for newcomers, a refuge for those fleeing hardships, seeking peace, and dreaming of new beginnings. Here, waves of immigrants and refugees from across the globe came together, bringing with them their cultures, traditions, and aspirations. It was in the Ward's bustling streets and modest homes that the seeds of Toronto's celebrated diversity were first sown, and still define Toronto to this day. I'm Wyse, and on behalf of Jay Jones, welcome to Down Home, the Canadian experience from two black men.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, sip of breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, sip of breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, sip of breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
I'm kind of surprised we've never come across this story of the Ward, or St. John's Ward is called, before. Like it, I guess we in our early days of the podcast, we were focused on Nova Scotia and stories centered around Nova Scotia. And then when we started to kind of broaden our focus here to Toronto and whatnot and the rest of the country, we fell upon the Leslieville, which was a great find by you. That was an awesome story.
Yeah, and you found the Ward.
Yeah, the Ward. It's just such an interesting story. And like we think about the image of Toronto, and the image of Toronto is like a diverse, multinational place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where does this come from? Like it actually came from the establishment of the Ward.
yeah, for sure.
To be honest, man.
Yeah, I was quite amazed because it has. I was struck by a lot, just in the sense of not knowing the neighborhood existed, just not sort of being in Toronto for 26 years. You think you know these things, but like you say, we pivoted to doing more research for our podcast. Before, it was like a lot of interviews, so we were more worried about getting people and telling their stories, and of course tied into Nova Scotia, like you say. But the way we pivoted to this sort of area of the podcast, we've discovered a lot. Like you say, I keep reiterating what you just say, but I find it amazing that this place existed. At first, it was called Macaulay Town, by Dr. James Macaulay. He found it, but I guess he was home alone. And then, but then it turned into a sort of a place for penniless men from all walks of life, and all having to do of men and women, families coming from dire places of where they've been, coming to Canada and trying to create a better life. They all came out of stressful situations, from the Chinese to the European immigrants, the Irish, who are very famous, coming to Toronto, and of course the blacks, all coming from the Underground Railroad and after the wars, and also the wars being fought in Europe and stuff like that. It was quite amazing, I find.
The Ward was bounded by College, Queen, Yonge Street, and University Avenue, with its heartbeat at the intersection of Trelawney Street, now Bay Street, and Albert Street, known today as Dundas Street. The Ward emerged in the mid-19th century as one of Toronto's earliest immigrant neighborhoods, shaped by waves of newcomers seeking refuge and opportunity. Initially, it became home to Irish families fleeing the devastating potato famine. By the mid-1800s, Americans escaping slavery via the Underground Railroad found sanctuary here, contributing to its reputation as a place of hope. In the late 19th century through to the 1920s, Russian and Eastern European refugees, many fleeing persecution, arrived, adding to the neighborhood's vibrant cultural tapestry. The ward became a hub for Toronto's growing Jewish and Italian communities, with bustling markets, churches, and businesses defining the streets. It was also the site of Toronto's first Chinatown, as Chinese immigrants established businesses and homes in the area, further enriching its diversity. The ward thrived as a center of resilience, culture, and the foundational spirit of Toronto's multicultural identity. Yeah, exactly. And one of the earliest businessmen, and you did mention the Underground Railroad, was Thornton Blackburn.
Yeah.
He's like, I stumbled upon his story. He's very interesting, man.
Yeah.
So, like, he was born into slavery in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually led this very daring escape out of Detroit. So, as we know, Detroit is a northern city, and at the time in 1830, there were a lot of born free Black people,
Mm-hmm.
and they caught wind of Blackburn and his wife being held in a local jail.
Yeah.
And about 400 people, 400 men, I should say, stormed the prison to break them out. But before that, actually, like Blackburn's wife Lucy traded the little bit of clothing that she had with one of the workers of the jail, and actually gained passage out of the jail. And she fled to Canada first, and then Thornton actually, in the midst of this riot, it's actually called the Blackburn Riot.
Yeah, it was Detroit's first sort of racial uprising.
Yeah, exactly, man. And that's in the midst of that. That's when he made his way across to Canada, but then got captured again.
Yes.
And they actually had extradition hearings to see if they were going to send him back. And the governor of Canada famously said, which is hilarious, he said, "Well, I don't see how an individual can actually steal himself," because that was the reasoning behind. I think it was the state of Michigan saying, "Okay, well, there's an escaped slave."
Yeah,
that's gone into your territory, and we need him back, and in the sense that he was property, right?
Yeah.
And like, the governor of Canada said, "Well, I don't really see how an individual can steal himself, so we're not sending him back."
Yeah, it actually created a lot of good bonds for a lot of fugitive slavery in the future for decades to come, because that was just in the midst of everything, sort of slaves being freed, and after fighting the wars, Canada was actually very welcoming to fugitive slaves. And that's the other point it brought up, just sort of reading about it and reading about this particular story where Blackburn got caught. Yeah, the wording of it and sort of the rhetoric that they used back in the day branded Black people as a problem, like fugitive. Like, you know what I mean? You were considered a criminal because you were fighting for your freedom. Yeah. And the fact that you were owned, like, that's what makes it all so crazy. So what really struck me is these things that have labeled Black people, stereotypically, and these are the things where they derive from, just a fugitive slave. That puts you in bad light already. So you got to strike against you even before that. Not only being that, but you're also Black, know? So anyway, it brought up, like, not a lot of stuff, but it infuriated me a little bit of what, if you look back at the way just people were treated and the tags that they get, tagged with, and then they can fight that their whole life,
Yeah. And
anyway,
it is interesting. And Canada has its own issues with racialized people, but
of course,
Thornton viewed the Toronto area as like a safe haven.
Yeah,
So
and a
he was,
second chance.
yeah, second chance. So he actually like literally, he made the best of it. He worked at a hotel,
Mhm.
and eventually he actually established Toronto's first cab service. So it was like horse-drawn buggy.
Yeah.
And with his money from running that business, he was actually able to buy a number of properties in the ward,
Hmm.
which he actually rented out to other black people that were able to escape from the States and
Yeah.
bring themselves to freedom.
And they were famous for that, actually,
Mm,
supporting, fugitive, well, not fugitive, slaves, or people who were just starting over. So you could almost say that he was kind of a conductor of the Underground Railroad,
yeah,
in a
exactly.
sense, because he provided a safe haven, or at least a place for people to start. And in the early ward, there were about 50 blacks. The population of blacks in the war were about 50 in its early thing. And Blackburn actually became well known because he mixed in all those circles. He started off as a server at Osgood Hall, which might be the place where they say he might have been privy to the information about the cab in the first place,
Right.
it being called a hackney cab. So
Hmm.
amongst the elite, them discussing business, he might have been privy to some information. So that's where he may have gotten a tip to sort of start it. And of course, like, he bought several family properties, and then later a lot of black. There was another freed slave that came from way of I can't remember where, but he came with money, and he sort of started buying some properties as well. And him and Blackburn kind of became sort of leaders of the black community, and there was quite a few abolitionists,
Hmm.
against that at that time. So it really ran strong. But sadly, hearkening the days of Africville, it was also branded a slum.
With the lack of municipal investment and families crammed into poorly constructed wooden homes, overcrowding and lack of sanitation led to outbreaks of diseases like cholera and typhus in the mid 1800s. As the population became more dense in the area towards the turn of the 20th century, tenement housing became common, with little access to clean water, proper sewage, or heating. Despite these hardships, the community developed strong social and cultural networks. It was around 1920 when the ward started to gain the reputation as a slum. Despite the vibrant nature of the area with its markets, workshops, community centers, and independent businesses, urban renewal efforts started, which resulted in the demolition of many homes and businesses, displacing residents and taking the community off of the map, replacing it with government buildings and commercial developments. Yeah, I think, like in the early days of the war, like we're talking like 1830, 1840, you had the black community and the Chinese community. Those were the early residents of the war. But then as time went on, it was the area was populated by, as you mentioned, Irish during because of the Great Potato Famine
Mm-hmm.
that happened around 1850. You had Russian and Eastern European refugees
Yeah,
because of all the wars that were happening during that time as well.
yeah.
Um,
Italians.
you had Italians. You had the city's first Jewish community as well,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and of course Italians. So,
Yeah,
and as well as like Polish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, like all the non-British
yeah,
immigrants were in this particular neighborhood, and
exactly.
as it grew, like any other large growth situation, you need capital investment, you need development,
Hmm. Yeah,
and that's something that it lacked. And
yeah,
unfortunately, there were poorer situations in the ward, definitely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was also a bout of lot of sickness too.
Hmm.
So a lot of people fell to that, and sort of then the rich people in Toronto started to sort of you know throw things at it that sort of got the mass population involved into trying to eradicate it.
Yeah, there was a number of different issues in the area. Like
Yeah.
it was all those who had jobs, it was all working class.
Hmm.
Um, so the area actually um, was home to a lot of social strife at the time. So this is before labor unions,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you got turn of the century around 1900 or so. There were a number of very large strikes. Like there was one, like the Eaton Center, of course, right? But the origins of the Eaton Center, Eaton, the businessman Eaton had a
Yeah.
number of plants, and for he was making his clothing and whatnot in downtown Toronto. So he was one
Okay.
of the larger employers.
Right.
So
Right.
there was a
Right.
large strike there with people wanting to have a standardized work week instead of having to work 7 days a week, or just an 8-hour work week and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So they had strikes for that.
Yeah.
There was another strike for the just garment workers, again because of that area. There was a lot of garment workers, and there was something called an anti-fascist strike. So we talked about this before about the rise of fascism in North America. So
Yeah.
around 1930, 1933, there was a large fascist following that was like, yay, Nazi Germany, basically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Of
So
course. Yeah.
there was a lot of working people that were like, yeah, this isn't great. So there was a
Hmm.
huge strike for that as well.
Yeah.
So the area it's very interesting. You had this huge dichotomy of workers who were standing up for themselves.
Hmm.
They and because there was no municipal investment, they actually the area actually there was a lot of community based services and support networks
Yeah. Yeah.
that were
Yeah.
established
Hmm.
without the actual investment of the municipality.
Right.
But as you said, that wasn't enough. You need large swaths of capital to
To
actually upgrade,
sustain.
yeah,
Yeah.
to sustain and improve the living conditions,
Yeah.
which the city of Toronto did not do.
No, and it was the blueprint of what Toronto came to be. I mean, of
Mm.
course, those were different times and a lot of strife, like you say, and stress. But it was a melting pot, and they did try to make it work. And then slowly, as they did expand, and the city came in and took different parts of it, um, different mo- different groups they filtered to different parts of neighborhoods, which came to like Italy became College Street became Little Italy. The Jewish moved out. The blacks were still kind of around, but they moved maybe out to Scarborough area a little bit. So, and yeah, it was just everyone started to break apart, and that's what happened. And then, of course, when they did invest in it, they took most of it away. But there's still remnants of some things. There's a couple buildings along Elizabeth Street that are still original buildings that might be restaurants. Of course, there's Union Station, which a lot of Chinese settled there because they were working on the railroad. So it was also a place of industry as well. Yeah, it had a lot going on, but not the support, like you say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, and I think we're as our journey through Canada and looking at these situations continues.
Mhm.
Uh, it's a situation that's being played over and over again, where
Yeah.
there's a spot where the elite or the ownership class deem it to be uh, not in their best interest to have it continue. So it
Exactly.
happened in Africville.
Yeah.
Instead of enlisting municipal investment, let's bulldoze it and move them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Happened in the ward. We
Yeah.
have this rich, culturally rich area it's just it kind of blows my mind. What would Toronto look like if they invested in the ward, and you had this hub of all these cultures in one area?
Yeah.
What would Toronto look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it probably would have thrived. A little bit more, maybe mom and pop shops. Everybody would have gotten used to working and living amongst each other instead of, the economics of it all is sometimes what creates the great divide. And people have to leave and go to different places to find support and jobs and money for their family to live in this crazy world sometimes. And that is what I noticed. The biggest thing is that, the cities, the rich, they can help, but they don't. So, I'm not putting the blame on them, but, everybody lives in the city and everybody can benefit if everybody does their part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And some people don't always have the money, but they'll do their part to help to keep it alive if there's support going up and down the line, instead of being deemed this or that or sort of racially marginalized and feeling like you're not really anything to society because you don't have the money back in your name. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, another example of a neighborhood being bulldozed for quote unquote urban renewal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with the spot magex. Now it's time to flex with the force from the soul, reaching all aspects, getting deep, no time to sleep. As you reach your next phase, laying it all on the line. New trail start to blaze. It's a fire inside, a brand new path, breaking down the sum to one. Feeling free, I just laugh with the joy.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
Like magic prescribed, only to see the perfect blend, like a diamond in the rough, ready to drop a perfect gem. It's time to shine so fine to see what you find.